I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Buddha.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Dharma.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
I take refuge in the Sangha.
Keeping the palms joined. Put the palms down. All right, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. Thank you for showing up. Anyone here for the first time? What brings you here?
An interest.
An interest in?
Buddhism.
What do you think it is?
Well, I read a book called Intro to Buddhism, and it pretty much just told me about the historical figure and his beliefs and teachings, rather than any following religions or anything like that.
Yeah.
And it got me really interested. I liked his theories a lot.
Nice. So you can lead this. It's probably one more book than I've ever read. So welcome. First time, what brings you here?
Searching for tranquility.
Yes. And you think you'll find it here.
I hope so.
Do these people look tranquil to you?
Not yet.
Glad you're here. It's Casey, right? Not yet, man. Glad you're here. And you?
I'm here with my dad.
You're already tranquil. How old are you?
14.
Nice. It's a good age. I was a mess at 14. So angry, depressed, and miserable. I wish I found this stuff when I was 14. It would have saved me years of pain and suffering and misery, you know? Yeah. But you look way better off than I did when I was 14, so glad you're here. Anyone else here for the first time? Those of you keep coming back, why do you keep coming back? You two can face that way, otherwise it looks like you're praising me, and that's really weird. So you can just face the statues and you're good. Yeah. I'm not into the whole, are you Tibetan practitioners? No. Yeah, Tibetans do that. Tibetan practitioners do that a lot. There's this, and it's out of respect. It's not a bad thing. Sorry if I embarrassed you by doing that, but it's this, Tibetan Buddhism is very much this, as there is in all Buddhism and tradition, this kind of reverence for the leaders. And Tibetan Buddhism, you see it the most, where like it's this, the praising. And I sound like I'm almost saying it in a condescending way, but I really do respect it and find it beautiful. It just doesn't translate so well into a Western culture because we see people bowing down to people and they're elevated, and there's this reverence that I think in Western culture with Buddhism, and I've talked about this a lot, but it can get really dangerous and really toxic because then it comes off as if like the people are worshiping or seeing the person sitting here as their savior and as the one who's gonna like, you know, fix them. As I always say, like your shit is your shit, you know what I mean? And so when I saw you sitting like that, it was very much this Tibetan thing where the Tibetan disciples would come in and sit there and they would like praise the master. And so that made probably me more uncomfortable than it did you. I was like, no, please don't do that. You know?
So don't bow to you.
Don't bow to me. Yeah, I'm a mess. I've just been a mess a very long time, and I've worked with it a very long time. So I'm like a tiny bit less of a mess than I was like 20 years ago. Yeah. How about you? What brings you all here?
Guided meditation is really helpful. I can't seem to do it by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. It is challenging. How many of you have like a really disciplined daily practice by yourself? Right. And is it more challenging at home than it is when you go somewhere?
Yes.
Why do we think so?
I think there's a group energy here that feels hopeful and encouraging.
Yeah.
that it's worth meditating.
For sure. What else? Why? Yeah.
You started to say, why do you keep coming back?
Oh,
it's like, because I learn something every week. And so this last week, I've been contemplating on the "you're wrong, I'm right" thing all week long. So, because that's what we were talking about last week. And so every time somebody annoys me, I'm like, okay, am I doing the "I'm right and you're wrong" thing? 95% of the time I am, you know. It's like I'm saying, I'm right, whatever you're doing is wrong. And I need to stop doing that.
Yeah. It's hard, huh?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I also was going to speak to that. Why do I keep coming back? I've been coming pretty regularly since August, and this is the only time that I do meditation. And without coming here, I don't do it. And like she said, I always learn something. I gather something. My daughter comes with me. Sometimes my son needs to, and he won't yet. He's 11, and we're still working on it. But I appreciate the space, and I'm grateful for the experience.
Maybe when he's 14.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when he's 14.
Or it'll be like my friend, he'll get in trouble and I'll make him come.
Yeah, remember that night when they were here because they got in trouble and they were forced to come here?
That's my friend and her daughter, and
I love the fact that the Buddhist temple became punishment for the children.
Watch out.
That was great. And now that I'm comfortable with it, you can totally face this way now. It doesn't bother me anymore. If it's more comfortable for you and you don't have to turn your head all the time. That was really more my stuff than yours. It was funny too, and then we'll start with the meditation practice. But when we were downtown for 10 years, many of you know this, but when we moved here 8 years ago, so downtown, the main hall, which was, tiny, but it was all just like one level, And when we came here, again, April will be 8 years, and even coming up here, I remember it took me a few months to get comfortable for me sitting up here because of that kind of elevated, perceived elevated status thing. And again, that just comes from my background with Buddhism and what I would perceive and things like that. But it took a while to feel comfortable in this kind of elevated place. Because that view, especially for those who are new to Buddhist practice, it might seem as if you're praising that person who is sitting up there and that you're looking at them as, the person or whatever. And there's one of my favorite Buddhist expressions is don't seek to be like the Buddha, seek what he saw. And so with Buddhist practice, especially if you're new to it, you're not trying to become the Buddha. You're not trying to become this enlightened one. It's not happening for any of us anytime soon. I hate to shatter your hopes and dreams. It's going to be a while. But if we can suffer a little bit less, if we can understand that what the Buddha was seeking was a way to end or at least minimize suffering. So if we can reach a place where we're minimizing suffering a little bit every day, that's really what the practice is about, is figuring out how do we as individuals begin to minimize our suffering. And again, for me as a practitioner, I don't wake up thinking, is today the day that all of my suffering is going to go away? I just think, can I suffer a little bit less today than I did yesterday? And for me, the teachings create that space, which are just a mirror to reflect back on my own thoughts, my own words, my own actions. Because, as you said, 95%, it's actually 100, but we'll give you that 5. That suffering comes from our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and our reaction to the world around us. So we're all just working on suffering a little bit less. So with that, we'll start with a meditation practice. For those who are joining virtually, welcome. Glad you're here. Thanks for showing up. A couple things to tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You're not going to have any mystical, magical experiences. The mind that races all day long is not going to shut off. Don't judge your practice, meaning don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Are you doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit, we're going to breathe. You'll hear sounds inside the room, sounds outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And this practice of learning to get quiet and still within all of the chaos. Posture, you want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, often it helps slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward. Allows the back to straighten, shoulders are relaxed. If you're on a bench or chair, however you're seated, just trying to sit up straight. If you need to move, simply move. Movement doesn't make you a bad meditator, it just means you need to move. I'll guide us as we begin, and we'll settle into a little bit of silence. starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth is open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths, slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. Expecting nothing but to sit and breathe. As the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it. Release that thought. Return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in. Breathing out, follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from your practice. Just sitting, breathing. Keeping the mind alert. Aware of each sound. Each thought. Each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still, rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do. Nowhere else to go. And no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. And once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And when ready, slowly opening the eyes, slowly beginning to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. And realize however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with at this moment, has nothing to do with anything I said. It's nothing to do with how you sit and hold the hands or cross the legs. It's nothing to do with the sounds around us or anything else for that matter. It has everything to do with your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakening. He was a human being, no different than any one of us, who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to understand the causal relationship of all phenomena. And what that means, very simply, for all of us, regardless of where you come from or what you believe in and where you think you're going, your whole life is filled with things that happen. You react. More stuff happens, more reactions. That's it. This practice is simply learning what it's like to respond to something quietly, peacefully, still. Because for most of us, the way you responded to the last 20 minutes is quite different from how you respond to every other 20-minute period of your day. And so all you're working on is closing the gap toward the way you feel now is closer to how you feel always. Just as driven, motivated, productive, successful, whatever that means to you in your respective lives. But with a mind that's steady, clear, focused, distracted by nothing, disturbed by no one. It's not an easy practice. It's not necessarily fun. It's not an escape, as often people think it is. It is direct perception into the present moment. And the present moment, as we know, is often filled with chaos, conflict, difficulty, challenges. This is life. This practice is learning to be with life as it arises, as opposed to what many of us have done most of our lives, which is run. Running away from something, running towards something. If your life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, meditation doesn't fix it. It helps you become aware of your thoughts and words and actions that leads to a life that's a mess. So it helps you begin to see where you can make changes in your thoughts, words, and actions. It's what the Buddha taught very simply. What we think, what we say, and what we do creates our reality. This is our karma, what we bring into the world. And so being mindful of our thoughts and mindful of our words and mindful of our actions. That is the entire practice. That's, in essence, what he taught, as they say, 84,000 different ways for 45 years before he died. Meditation is free. Buddhist practice is free. It's just sitting, breathing, learning to be kind to yourself and everybody else you encounter. Every moment of your life, and that's not easy. Once we stop trying to change, fix, control, manipulate everything and everyone around us, and we work on changing our mind and our reaction to the world around us, life gets simpler. Like I said, it's a practice. And it requires patience and diligence. It's not easy to begin to explore the nature of your own mind, especially if it's a mess. It's not fun, it can be scary, but that's what this practice is. It's being able to look at it, holding up a mirror and reflecting back on your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And then seeing how you can make changes. Slowly. So be patient. It's not a 6-week course. It's not something that after 3 months you've got it all figured out, and then you move on. Your life will be filled with chaos forever. question is, how do you respond to it? So, with that, I'll pause. For me, I always really prefer to respond to questions. Meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with. To those joining virtually, again, welcome. Glad you're here. Feel free, as you are, say hello. If you have any questions, put them in the chat box. I'll do my best to respond. I will open up to questions.
You told us a few times about some virtual sessions you had with a very interesting group in Chicago.
Oh.
And I was wondering if you've done any of those lately.
Oh, with, yeah, I haven't with Jay. And it's called Heavy Metta. Like heavy metal. You know, he's a definite, punk rock dude. And we stay in touch via social media, but I haven't actually sat with them in a minute, probably since last time I talked about it. Their sits are the same. It's actually just an hour. That time he was here visiting, I think they start an hour before we do. So it's Tuesday nights. Yeah, Heavy Metta, they're great. I mean, I love Jay. He was visiting here probably about a year and a half ago maybe and stumbled in. That's how we met and stayed in touch. But it's a great example of, often we see this where people were here for a while and they move away or, something like that. And they talk about, not being able to find a community of people to practice with. And I always tell people, like, grab a book, get some people interested that want to read the book together, sit quietly and talk about it. Kind of creating your own little sanghas and your own little space is really important as well. But yeah, Jay's, they're great. I'll let him know you asked about him. Yeah.
You responded to the lady here that there was one more book than you had read.
Oh yeah.
What?
Don't listen to what I say, man.
What book do you read?
What book do I read? So my two favorite kind of intro to Buddhism books that I recommend, they're not even intro to Buddhism books, but my two favorite books that I recommend. One is called Lotus in the Stream. It's out of print. You can get it on Amazon. It's out of print just because they had a new translation of it done and changed the name. But I still prefer the original translation personally. And it's all the basic Buddhist teachings like Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, Six Paramitas, Dependent Origination, Karma, Rebirth, How to Study Buddhism. It's kind of all these basic core fundamental Buddhist teachings. And each chapter is like 15 pages. So that's why I love it. It's very, it's kind of easy to kind of read and digest, and then a lifetime to practice it. So it's one of those things that I truly believe you could just read that book and never read another book in your life. The second one is Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, which is definitely kind of, I don't want to say opposite of that, because to say opposite of that would really not do justice to the book itself. But Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, obviously being a Zen, for me as a Zen practitioner, the Zen practice based on the title. But the easiest way to sum that one up is it's also a book you can read your whole life. You can read it, once every 6 months, once a year. Every time it'll hit you differently, just like anything we read. As we evolve, we change, we grow. But the Zen Mind, Beginner Mind, the essence is that the entire world as you see it is not how you see it. Meaning the world is not how you see it. The world is only your perception. And we all have different perceptions. Going back to your 95%, And Zen Mind, Beginner Mind helps you embrace the art of learning to be with something as if you've never been with it before. A person, place, or thing. Because if you can learn to be with something, or let's just say someone, for example, you have anyone you're angry after the last 10 or 40 years? a few people, right? Not a few years, I'm guessing. A few people, yeah. So imagine, if you will, one of those people you cross paths with, and without punching them and cussing them out, you actually approach them as if you've never seen them before. How would that change things? A lot. But what we do as humans, right, and believe me, you're not the only one in this room, that's why we're all here for various reasons. But what we do is we create stories in our head about the people we're angry at, and we carry that with us our entire lives. And we never let it go. We never move past that. And so we're still stuck there. And every time the thought of them, the sight of them, the sound of them, all these senses kick in around them, and all of a sudden, who's miserable? You are. Like, we're still pissed off at people from 40 years ago that don't ever think about us at all, potentially. But we're so angry at them. They could be gone, either passed on or just not in our lives anymore, but we're angry. So the idea of beginner's mind is to begin to understand that each moment is brand new. And it allows us to not ignore the past, not forget, not pretend it didn't exist. It happened, whatever happened. Whatever you're angry about, people show up here with lots of trauma, lots of stuff. This isn't to discount or discredit or, not give, validation to the experiences people have gone through. It's definitely, to validate those experiences, but to understand them and to see them a little bit differently so we suffer less. Zen mind, beginner mind really, I think, helps shatter the way we see the world, which then leads to what I'm talking about. Yeah. Zen mind, beginner mind. And man, if I learned that at 14, it saved me like 30 years. I mean, you can't be angry at anything for more than 14 years, right? And granted, before 4, how much do you, so maybe you've been angry about something for 10 years. Don't be like the rest of these people and be angry about it for the next 40, By the time you're 20, get that shit done. What else? There's a comment here. Lotus in the Stream is incredible. I just started it recently. Very concise and great. Yeah, for sure. It's golden. What else? Yeah.
I don't know quite how to word this, but I think I used to be very practiced in being able to accept the things that were out of my control. And I almost never got angry. Almost never. And I loved it. It was great. Until there were things in my life that should have made me angry. And I should have used that, I could have used that anger to propel me out of certain situations. But because I didn't have it, I wasn't able to, I guess, recognize that I could propel myself out of that situation. And so I think I took accepting things too far. And now I'm on the opposite spectrum of that, and I feel like I've gone backwards because, man, I'm trying to accept things again, and I'm like, man, it was so easy back then.
Right, that ignorance is bliss type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple things on this. One is, the first thing I was going to say, just in I guess maybe a more personal level, just from my personal experience with things, is that, we want to be careful about being indifferent to things. Right, and you kind of said that. I'm just voicing it again. I think for a lot of people who might be new to Buddhism, and this isn't even towards you, there's often this misconception or idea that Buddhist practice means that we kind of just don't care about things, or that whatever's happening is okay. No, there's disgusting, horrific things going on in the world today, and there have been for 1,000 years, and there will be for another 1,000 years. So this idea, and I sit here with so much, with every privilege in the book, literally, but this idea of just being indifferent to things isn't at all embedded into Buddhist practice. Like, everything matters, everything is important. People suffer, people experience joy, and these emotions are important to experience and feel. And so we don't want to become, the word that popped into my head when you were speaking was, we don't want to become numb. Because when you were first speaking, that was the word that popped in, almost as if you were becoming numb to things that were going on, as a way to kind of build some sort of barrier or protection for you, to just become numb to it, which, as you know, is not healthy, right? And so, from a very specific Buddhist lens, the idea of the middle path, a couple things come up, is really important, in that the extremes with everything, with emotions, with food, with clothes, with things we consume, finding a middle path balance is important. And so you've experienced one extreme, and now it sounds like you're experiencing the other. And so time will allow you to continue to cultivate kind of the last piece to this, which is the way we overcome anger is with compassion. And so the second noble truth, which if you read an Intro to Buddhism book, you would have covered this. The Four Noble Truths, first one is suffering. Doesn't mean all of life sucks, it just means we're going to suffer a lot. Discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction. We don't like the temperature, we don't like the food we ate, whatever it is. And the second one is the cause of this suffering, greed, anger, and ignorance. And the way we overcome greed, anger, and ignorance, greed is with generosity, anger is with compassion, and ignorance is with wisdom. So ultimately, to your question, the practice is to cultivate as much compassion as possible, but first and foremost towards yourself. And very often when, based on the way you ask the question, what it potentially sounds like is you were really maybe, I'm just making stuff up as always, but maybe lacking compassion towards yourself, which allowed you to just put up this wall and stay numb to things. And that allowed you, created a situation where you just stayed numb to things as if you didn't matter. Have you had compassion for other people? Have you had love and care for other people? If someone or something was harming them, wouldn't that bother you? But yet, for some reason, when something or someone is harming us, we just avoid it. And there's no compassion there. That's the ignorance, right? That we're ignoring that we're in pain. And so to send the love and compassion towards ourselves is the way we overcome that anger. So it's allowing us to experience that pain and suffering, which is, the first thing he said, Buddha said life is filled with suffering. And very often people want to skip that part. Well, I get it, cool, next page. But we don't want to run through that too quickly. We don't want to skip that too quickly. I get it, we don't want to suffer, of course. But if you're just so focused on ending suffering, you're potentially just avoiding what the suffering actually is. And there's a kind of a term called spiritual bypassing, where you're just trying to get lost in meditation, get lost in Buddhism, get lost in terminology, get lost in stuff, the facade of Buddhism. But this is work. And so the practice of cultivating compassion towards yourself and towards others, super critical. And the last piece I'll say on that is then understanding that these emotions, as we experience them, they're not necessarily going to stop arising. But the beauty of the Buddhist teachings on impermanence is what allows us to be with them, right? I kind of joked about it earlier, but I was angry for pretty much the first 25, 30 years of my life. And so never thinking that anger was going to go away. But the teaching of impermanence tells us that everything is impermanent. Emotions are impermanent. Our lives are impermanent. The people and places and things, every person, place, and thing in our life right now, at some point is going to be gone. So why hold all this anger and resentment towards things when our life, it's one day we're done. So there's too many beautiful, precious things in this world to waste time being angry, But don't ignore that anger as it's arising. Just give it some love and compassion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I talked a little bit about this before with you, about how not to let whatever's going on in the world affect me, and it's how I react to it. And I have managed to, with some compassion, with one-on-one people that think differently than me, because I overlook, they got other qualities. So there are human heart in some ways. But recently, I found myself depressed by circumstances, external circumstances that are affecting me, hitting me more. And I can't find joy in that.
Sure. Yeah, depression sucks. And, kind of to add on to what I was just saying, your depression's not going to be there forever. It will change. It might even get worse. Right? It could get worse. And then it could get better. And then worse again, and then better again. And then to some point in time, it'll fall away completely. So that's kind of what I mean very specifically about just being with those emotions. I would just caution on, instead of labeling it as I'm depressed, because that sounds so miserable. right? I mean, speaking from very personal experience, right, from someone who lived that way for many years. Just the sound of that, and Buddhist teachings around the second arrow, you probably heard me talk about this, but like, if you're sad or angry or whatever it is, say you're sad, what's going on? Be sad. Try to just be with the sadness. That's the first arrow. Second arrow is anger. You don't want to go there, because now you're angry and sad. Now that you're angry and sad, then you start getting depressed. Now you're sad and angry and depressed. Now you're anxious because you're constantly depressed, because you're angry, because you're sad. Be with the sadness. It's temporary. It'll change. The world will always be a mess, sometimes more so than others. And the fact that that impacts you, again, everybody wants to escape from that. Like, good. It's good that you're sad, that people are suffering right now. Why does that have to be such a bad thing? You know what it means?
We care.
You care. But when we label it as, I'm depressed. Again, I'm no therapist. If you're in therapy, stay in therapy. If you're on meds, stay on your meds. All right? It's for people who've never heard me talk like this before, right? Buddhism is not therapy. Therapy is not Buddhism. Both of them are important, right? As I always say, half the people here are in therapy, and the other half are therapists. And half the therapists are in therapy. So whatever your therapy is, stay there, keep it, don't abandon it. But in this regard, coming from my lens as a Buddhist practitioner, depression is just some really heavy, strong label you put on yourself, and then you categorized yourself. And then you tell everybody all day long, I'm so depressed.
Who wants to hear that?
Right? Well, yeah, I mean, you said it, not me, right? Here, we always want to hear it. But that's the point, is that then we start reinforcing that over and over and over again. And then we're just depressed because we're depressed. You don't even remember what you're depressed about anymore. So feel that sadness and act on that with compassion and love. People are so wrapped up in changing so many big things right now. There are people in your neighborhood, in your community, in your house, in your colleagues, in your family. They need love and attention and care. You can give them love and attention and care. And that will make you and them feel better. If everybody just mopes around like, the world is coming to an end, then no good comes from that. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
It sort of ties in with the question or the discussion around like acceptance, and I things don't, I'm one extreme or the other, right? And often things don't sort of stick to me, which from my perspective, like, part of it is life is short, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, how important is it really, kind of thing. And sometimes it just doesn't, I'm like, okay, I'm on to the next thing. But that isn't always received well by the other people in my life who might not appreciate that I'm moving on to the next thing while there's still stuff, but not necessarily for me. I'm not sure where the line is and how to have compassion for the other people in my life.
I think that, and it's funny because in all my rambling, I don't even know if I touched on the acceptance piece of it, but hopefully that tied together somewhere. But the part about the acceptance of so years ago I had friends, both into Buddhism, one like die hard, and the other just And they were a couple and they would argue. And when they would argue, he would pull the, well, I'm Buddhist, I don't argue card. How do you think that went over? Not so well, right? So I think that the fine line that you're looking for, again, coming back to that middle path, is like, I mean, sure, on some levels, it's great that things are just kind of, if they're not affecting you. You're not allowing things that maybe before would have triggered you and ruined a whole day or a week or a year or whatever. The idea of not getting so stuck on certain things is wonderful. But then I think there is kind of this wisdom that has to come into play that says, okay, it's good for you. And again, I'm kind of just repeating your question out loud. You didn't ask a question about what you're sharing. But how does that impact other people? And Buddhist practice isn't just about impacting us. It's how affecting us with more love, more kindness, more compassion, how that also impacts others. So in essence, what you're saying is sometimes your potential wisdom or your compassion or your ability to just not allow things to impact you is actually making other people really angry. And so I think it's fair to honor that, and not that you necessarily need to justify it, but I would maybe just in certain situations kind of caution and again, I'm just running with scenarios in my head, like if somebody is bringing whatever to you and you're just kind of over it, maybe listen to them. Maybe be present with them. Maybe allow them to be angry at you or whatever it is, without just saying, hey, you're a mess, bye-bye. Right? I know. That's what I'm saying. That's why I don't like... Yeah.
I get it.
But you get my point. And so I think that that's something to watch, is how those actions and that kind of place of not being so affected, and that's what equanimity is, the practice of equanimity, how that also triggers others potentially. And then find some balance there. Not easy, but yeah. Mm-hmm. What else?
So, kind of also piggybacking on what you said where, she thought it was acceptance, but it might have actually been more like numbing, and it wasn't until later where you sort of discovered what that was. I feel like that is actually true for so many things where you're kind of fooling yourself about something, where you think something's true, but another thing's true. How do you not do that? What are some indicators that you might be jumping to conclusions, or you think you have the answer and you rally the troops around that answer and you're just wrong?
Well, the best way is to understand that you're always wrong.
Okay.
Not the answer you were looking for, I'm sure. But it's, we talk about this, and this is not a plug for Sunday, but we talk about, at the Heart Sutra class on Sundays, we talk about this because even going back to the Zen mind, beginner mind, you're familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Thich Nhat Hanh, great, passed away a couple years ago, but Vietnamese Buddhist monk, master, peace activist, artist, just an incredible mind. Brilliant at bringing Buddhism to Western culture. Walked alongside, literally hand in hand, with Martin Luther King for his work around social justice issues and racial inequality, and built Deer Park Monastery and also Plum Village in France. But anyways, one of his teachings, which to me was one of the best things I ever heard, he said nirvana, which is liberation, freedom from suffering, is freedom from views. And as soon as I heard that, as you're hearing this for the first time, as soon as I say to you, liberation is freedom from views, what are you doing?
Having a view about it.
Which is exactly what I did the first time I heard it. This was like 7-8 years ago. And so I've been wrestling with that in my head. And what for me, as a point of practice, what it eventually kind of settled on is that my views, many of them are strong, many of them are, kind of indifferent. They're not necessarily going to go away. I'm not going to read some Buddhist book and all of a sudden abandon all views. I'm going to be stuck in my views. But for me, the practice is, if I believe my view is the only view, I'm not allowing the possibility that any other view matters. And so that's why when you said that, I kind of jumped right away to this idea that, when we're stuck on thinking we are right, there's no space for anything. And that kind of expression of all views are wrong, really for me, who's stubborn, someone who grew up so stubborn and so determined and so convinced and so argumentative and so I'm right and this is this and this is this and you're wrong, and do you ever argue and lose, but then you keep arguing just to try to win the argument, even though you were wrong anyways?
Way after it's over.
What's that?
Way after the argument.
Way after, right? So this idea of it's all come back to our ego. With this surrendering this idea that I'm just wrong. I'm always wrong. And I don't mean that in a way that I think I'm, that I don't have any value. But by saying I'm always wrong, what that allows me to do is to recognize that if I'm wrong, that means there's space for somebody else to be what? Right. But if I immediately assume they're wrong, then I don't even want to hear them.
how do you balance that with like having confidence in the world and, you know, like knowing what the next step is, whilst also assuming that you're probably wrong?
Yeah. So the idea is it's similar to the questions around, you know, how do you stay present but also plan for the future, right? It's this idea that you can have confidence and prepare and plan for the future and move forward, as we all will. But the reality is the future is going to unfold completely differently from how you even imagine it. I mean, did any one of you, well, maybe some of you have been longer than a year, but any one of you a year ago think like on a Tuesday night I'm going to be sitting at some random little Buddhist temple at 7 o'clock? No. The future does not play out the way we thought it would. But when this is really Buddhist teachings on what you're asking about is non-attachment. Is that we're practicing not attaching to how the future unfolds. And so in these kind of decisions, and you use the word confidence, for me, instead of like being confident, it's looking at what is the intention that I'm putting into each moment with thoughts, words, and actions. Is it coming from a place of what's best for me or what's best for all of those around me, right? And is my intention really pure and good-hearted and gentle and kind, or is it selfish and greedy and angry? And usually we know. That doesn't mean we're always acting on that, right? I mean, even if I know I'm being greedy or selfish or whatever, doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to stop that, but at least we get to become aware of that. So we look at the intention of our actions, and then that kind of dictates how the future unfolds. But we're not attached to creating. Well, I'll kind of close this with this thought for you and everyone here, really. How much do you like to try to control things? A lot.
A lot.
Yeah. Because somebody who wouldn't ask that question. Right? Yeah. I'm telling you, between you two, I'm like talking to myself. You know, angry white men, we are the worst. Right? So if you try to control everything, that effort to try to control things is crushing. Because when it doesn't work out how you want it to, which it won't. And oh, by the way, it might even work out better than how you were trying to control it to be. But when you try to surrender control and just focus on the intention, and you embrace each moment as it arises based on the intention you put into it. You know, who here bakes? Anyone ever made a really good cake? You know, or brownies or cookies or whatever, right? You don't just eat the end result. Well, let me rephrase this. Of course you eat the end result, but it's only good at the end because of what? Every single ingredient that went into it. Every single one of those pieces of that recipe that went into making that cake or cookies or whatever it is. Every ingredient created the beauty of that taste. And so that's kind of what we have to look at, the small little recipe pieces. And, you know, try to surrender control as much as possible. Because it'll crush you, you know, if it hasn't already. And that's scary, because we don't like giving up control. You know, not at all. So, on that, I'm going to use my power and control to end the evening. So we'll join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all beings be at peace. May all be free from suffering. All right, a few quick announcements from our host, Dharma Bum Eddie, before you all head out.
Dharma Bum Eddie? I like that.
Dharma Bum Eddie, DBE.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dharma Bum Eddie, and I am tonight's host. We opened the Dharma Bum Temple 18 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice to those who show up. Those who lead are not nuns, monks, gurus, masters, or teachers, and are not looking for students. They're simply practitioners sharing their interpretation of the practice. Every night we have different classes led by different people from various Buddhist traditions. We have a recovery sangha that meets several times a week for anyone with addiction problems. And our food redistribution program meets every Thursday at 4:30 p.m. We have classes and programs every day, and everything we offer here is always free. The full schedule is on our website and posted in the entryway above the shoe rack. We have a lending library. If you see a book you like, feel free to borrow it and then bring it back whenever you're done with it. Please straighten your seat or cushion before you head out. If a few people could stay to close and latch the windows, that would be helpful. Thank you for being here. We wish you well and hope to see you all again.
Thanks.